The Personal Atmosphere 10 Studies in Poise and Power by Frank Haddock is basically what the title alludes to. Before I share my thoughts on this topic, let me take a minute and welcome you. If you found me on this video for the first time, I am Daisy, your hostess. I'm glad you found me. And to my friends and dear subscribers, welcome back. First, let's look at Frank Haddock. He retired from ministry to become a writer. He became well known for his teachings on willpower, cultivation of the will, ethics, financial and business success, philosophy, and spirituality. He exemplified the more secular and less overtly religious side of the New Thought movement. And with that background of the author in mind, it is no wonder that the first half of this book is heavy with scientific sources and theories. So you might have to deal with that and bear with that for a little bit, but it's got some good stuff. He dives into the conscious and unconscious aspect of man, lays a foundation and invitation for contemplation of thought and its impressions, also addresses the human energy field and its impact, which, by the way, if you are into human energy field, I do have a book here on the playlist which you may be interested in, titled The Human Aura, Astral Colors and Thought Forms by Swami Pachandasi. Some of you may notice that I shake the dust off old books, and you may ask, why go back when science is moving forward? I do it because I love it, and I marveled how, back then, with so little, we knew so much. I'm going to go in a loop for a minute. Don't worry, it will loop back somehow. It always does. I believe that one of the many quests of many philosophers and scientists is the search for the source of all. And if there is such a source, what direct link does man or spirit of man have? Given a supposition that we agree with the existence of spirit in man, how does spirit of man communicate with it, the source? And is there, if at all, the ability of will and mental energy to impress the minds of other beings, animate or inanimate? Now, I did not mention religion in this previous statement because it is my belief that there is documentation as far back as 3000 BC that there were high priests consulting leaders of the past, whether they were pharaohs or kings, who wore many hats. These were also knowledgeable in many fields, such as medicine, astronomy, theology. They were herbalists, seers, diviners, and stargazers. They were financial advisors, pretty much personal consultants. So it seems to me that science and religion were under the same roof. It was later when philosophers like Immanuel Kant and Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued for their separation, which is said to have happened in the late 1800s. Now keep in mind, Einstein was once quoted as saying, "Science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind." So in my opinion, the words mystery and occult are appropriate words when addressing the many yet unknowns of today, which are revealed to the eyes of the future, yet drawing men closer to new mysteries. In this book, there will be a discussion of thought impression and an argument of how does thought travel. And it was assumed that light waves, just like sound and water waves, required a medium to travel through. Even though that medium was never directly detected, people assumed its properties and even gave it a name, the luminiferous aether, or simply ether. Many scientists argued the existence of ether, but what we've come to think of empty space, we've learned that it's teeming with existence. I'm not a scientist nor a scholar, so I've left the sources of some of my findings in the description of this video. Otherwise, I do forewarn when I'm giving my own opinion. The scientists have discovered that all throughout the universe, different types of signals propagate. Some of them, like sound waves, require a medium to travel through. Others, like light or gravitational waves, are perfectly content to traverse the vacuum of space, seemingly defying the need for a medium altogether. Irrespective of how they do it, all of these signals can be detected from the effects they have on all the matter and energy that they interact with, both along their journey through space all the way up until their eventual arrival at their final destination. And you and I, we can attest this to be true by the use of our own senses. At least we know that they arrive. We don't really have to think about how Unless you're one of these people that want to, then you fall into that realm of science study and you want to know. But otherwise, we kind of give it or take it for granted that all these things are traveling and some of them reach us. Probably a lot of stuff reaches us, right? Even the author talks about stardust. I love it because even my husband was saying, "Hey, do you remember when we had the pool out here? I would bring a magnet and it would be full of iron. From where? It's falling from the sky." Interesting. I didn't mean to go out into personal experiences, but anyway, one of the many questions for science is, what is thought? And science now correlates because of their new findings and the equipment that they can now demonstrate that thought waves are essentially referring to brainwave frequencies, which are patterns of electrical activity in the brain that can be measured and associated with different mental states like thinking, relaxation, or deep sleep. And each state is characterized by a specific range of frequencies measured in hertz. So imagine the stuff that we can't measure that the brain is actually doing. Anyway, contrary to common experience, not everything needs a medium to travel through. Overcoming that assumption removes the need for an ether. The Nobel Prize in Physics 2004 was awarded to Frank Wilczek for the discovery of asymptotic freedom in the theory of the strong interaction. In his book, The Lightness of Being, Mass, Ether, and Unification of Forces, he writes that matter is built from almost weightless units, and pure energy is the ultimate source of mass. He calls it the lightness of being. Space is no mere container, empty and passive. It is dynamic grid, a modern ether. And hence, this brings me full circle to the present, where science now falls back to using the word ether where once they were debating it. Upon further reading this asymptotic freedom, they throw the word around quarks, and bypassing all the scientific jargon, of key interest to me was that according to current understanding in physics, quarks are considered to be indivisible, meaning they're the smallest known building blocks of matter and cannot be broken down into smaller components. So it seems that science and religion probably have more in common than they give each other credit. In that many religions believe in the concept of God is indivisible, often linked to the idea of divine simplicity, which states that God is without parts or divisions and his essence is completely unified. God is in all is in God. While this may be over my head, there is a part of me that understands it, but I just don't have the words for it. And I'm okay with that. So here's my butchery attempt at some of the things that came into my head. And this is all postulating in the realm of pseudoscience or philosophical speculation that thoughts are waves and waves travel, and that a focused thought can bond with the ether, creating a new potential packet of energy. I'm still working on what comes next, but all of this would fall into the realm of how we as humans impress and create, how we're that co-creator force, right? But that is all that I have for now. So as Carl Sagan famously said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And from the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 36, who has put wisdom in the mind and who has given it understanding? Well, these are my thoughts. I'll have more to share as we get into the next section. I look forward to your comments. So with that, I turn the page. The Personal Atmosphere by Frank C. Haddock. This book is in the public domain. Preface. This little book is a reprint of a chapter bearing the same title which appeared in the first edition of Power of Will. The chapter seemed a trifle out of place and was omitted from the second edition of that work. It is now given separate existence. Revision of its pages brought out from all directions a mass of suggestions and new material which might have swollen the volume to a much larger form. The original purpose of a small book, however, prevailed, and the 10 studies were restricted to the present limit. The older writing has become almost a new creature. The love of creation determined thus much. Particularly has the subject enlarged in the 9th and 10th studies. These are especially commended to seekers after the richest conscious life. It is believed that the new form of the page matter and the division into studies will prove helpful. I have faith to believe that I am doing a work which is really worthwhile. Many declarations of practical values derived by patrons from the use of the Power Book Library deepen that conviction. Let us all hold steadfastly to the assurance that in good time, in one way or in another way, each wayfarer through these fields of splendor and uplift, these paths of earth and spaces of the stars, shall arrive, largely and richly arrive. For, since we crown the psychic stress of the ages, all things belong to us in the plan of life and the law of harmony. The author. Initiative. I will not imitate. I do not stoop to mimic either living or dead. To ape the dead were robbery. Let the man carry the fame that's his. To imitate the living is treachery to my own soul, and I value my soul immeasurably. For this is all I have, better for me than other souls, and for my life, the whole thing, my point is the universe, my center of infinite existence. Therefore, I imitate not. I merely assert myself as the primitive Aryans had it. I bind myself together, freely, with never a thought of anyone else. This do the birds, beasts, stars. They are alike, yet unlike. Like as it pleases nature, oh, the motherhood of nature. Unlike as she pours, with the flow of her power, the sea of her plenitude into them. Now I tell you, will sing as I choose. Sing I choose as the purple hills and the solemn stars. I will be mine own self undaunted. If I travel a path trod by others, must I, forsooth, wear their clothes? Must I think their thoughts? But the road has changed. The day and the night and the objects all have been touched by life and duty, which things are forever new. And I, myself, am a power evolving, and the inner flame that flames within me is mine by the grace of creation. For creation itself is eternally new and now. And the indwelling fire makes all things mine, by a fiat divine, not granted any living being in all worlds. But precisely the same is true of you, shadow of self-reality. Oh, that fire fuses the universe anew into one globular value at my disposal. I see it, I feel it. The me of my individual existence sees, feels, is transfigured, and leaps to sing with perfect abandon and trust, exactly as it will and must, my song of destiny. Whoever sings, thinks, acts for himself and freely, is original, clean-cut, a complete soul. He confronts the worlds and conquers them, and his the scepter of a king. The author. The marvelous law, the universe, is yours, but each of its immense values, health, prosperity, unfoldment, and spiritual power, you must first claim within your own soul before one iota therefore can appear your objective life. Chapter 1. Personal Atmosphere. First study. Preliminary. This is the admission, the recognition of occult causes, that there are phenomena which, though unable to refer to any known cause or class, it would imply irrational ignorance to deny. This general proposition no one, I presume, will be fond to gainsay, for, in fact, the causes of all phenomena are, at last, occult. There has, however, obtained a not unnatural presumption against such causes, and this presumption, though often salutary, has sometimes operated most disadvantageously to science from a blind and indiscriminate application, in two ways. In the first place, it has induced men lightly to admit asserted phenomena, false in themselves, if only confidently assigned to acknowledged causes. In the second place, it has induced them obstinately to disbelieve phenomena, in themselves certain and even manifest, if these could not at once be referred to already recognized causes, and did not easily fall in with the systems prevalent at the time. An example of the former is seen in the facile credence popularly accorded in this country to the asserted facts of craniology. An example of the latter is seen in the difficult credence accorded in this country to the phenomena of animal magnetism. Phenomena in themselves the most ambiguous, which, for nearly half a century, have been recognized generally in Germany, while for nearly a quarter of a century they have been verified and formally confirmed by the Academy of Medicine in France. So true is the saying of Cullen, there are more false facts current in the world than false theories. So true is the saying of Hamlet, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Sir William Hamilton. 1. The personal atmosphere is a reality of the greatest importance in our life. Theoretically, it should be understood, at least in general terms. Practically, it should be utilized both for betterment and for right influence. The ends thus indicated constitute the object of this book. 2. Man is person exhibiting in body. The exhibit is in part body itself, in part conscious mind, by which is to be understood the entire sum total of personal activities within the body which are not involved in automatic physiological processes. All the activities are of the self, but the self is a deeper reality than either the body or the mind. The mind is not the self. The self is active in various ways within the body, and those ways, when not concerned in building and functioning the body, constitute a system of activities which we call the conscious mind. 3. In scientific world, it is held to be unthinkable that a force of gravity should act through space without an instrumental medium, the ether, see later sections. And light and heat are explained as certain movements of the ether within itself which affect us in ways to produce the sensations of vision and temperature. These movements are described as undulations, vibrations, and so on, and as Professor R.K. Duncan observes, once convinced that light consists of waves, the mind, the self, insists that these waves shall inhere in something. The ocean waves are made of water, sound waves of air, light waves of, we must say, something. This something cannot be air or water or any form of matter as we know it. For throughout that great reach of 93 million of miles between the sun and us, there exists but empty space. Filled this empty space is, however, and to the brim. There is no such thing as emptiness. From corner to corner of the universe, wherever a star shines or light darts, there broods this vast circumambient medium, the ether. not only through interstellar spaces, but through the world also, in all its manifold complexity, through our own bodies, all lie not only encompassed by it, but soaking in it as a sponge lies soaked in water. How much we ourselves are matter and how much ether is in these days, a very moot question. 4. So we may say that as activities go on within the body, some of which are concerned with A, the physiological functionings, demanding no conscious willing on our part, and some of which we describe as will, memory, and the like, there must be something that acts in all these various ways. That something is the self. When the self acts in the ways indicated by A, it exhibits physiological activities. When it acts in ways indicated by B, we call the sum of such activities mind. 5. Now, mental activities seem to be divisible into conscious and subconscious. The self, commonly speaking, is possessed of what is called consciousness, the sum total of now activities which are mental in character. But consciousness is not to be taken as mere awareness in the ordinary sense of the word. The sum total of mental activities embrace those of which we are not aware, no less than those of which we surely are aware. That is to say, mind may be both aware conscious and subconscious. There is the mental self with which you are very familiar, and there is the mental self of which you know exceedingly little. The latter is the subconscious self, the deeper reality of your personality. 6. It is to the existence and vital function of this large area of our personality, says Professor Barrett of Dublin, which is submerged below the level of consciousness, that I wish to draw attention. For psychologists are agreed that its range must be extended to include something more than is covered by our normal self-consciousness. What we call our self is a something which lies in the background of our consciousness, enabling us to combine the series of impressions made upon us or the states of feeling within us into a continuous personal identity. See section 29 from the book titled Humanitarian. 7. The organ of mind, at least the central organ, by means of which conscious mental activities and unconscious are conducted so far as we know, but which only partially may be required for some phases of the unconscious mental activities, is the brain. The brain, as material, lies immersed in, and fundamentally is composed of, the universal ether, that common medium of all the great physical forces of which we have knowledge. 8. Human life is grounded in physiology. Physiology is the basement of psychology, that is, material facts that we know underlie psychic facts as manifested. 9. The nature of matter, force, and spirit, the non-material self, is not certainly known. The new science leans to the theory that matter is electricity, which is a form of material force and which manifests in the universal ether. By the words material force, no one can intelligently mean other than a non-material somewhat which is capable of producing effects in the material world. The only conceivable reality so capable is will. But will is not material. It cannot be thought of in any terms that are appropriate to matter, and must be regarded as spiritual, as non-molecular, non-atomic, non-etheric. Matter is manifestation of spiritual energy or will. Material force is a gross effect of spiritual activity, that is, of will in action. Nevertheless, it is to be observed that matter and spirit, or will, are equally real. The reality of matter is temporal and phenomenal in nature. The reality of will is eternal and phenomenal in the unseen universe. Spiritual force is thus the fundamentally and ultimately real. Material force is an exploitation of the spiritual. 10. It is important to remember, however, that psychic facts as manifested imply and call for a psychic existence below them, and thus below all material facts exhibited in the bodily life. Section 2. Second study. The personal atmosphere suggested. 11. In Power for Success may be found these words: preliminary. The deeper self, the unconscious mind, may be regarded as the center of several outlying spheres. It centers A, the body; B, the personal atmosphere, explained below; C, the objective arena, the sphere of one's general influence; D, the universal ether; E, the all. Beginning with the last and returning to the first, we see that each sphere includes all other spheres preceding it in the order above given. The all vibrates into existence the universal ether, which pervades all material realms and realities, continually vibrating them into form and action. It is therefore immanent in, that is, present and active in, and embraces the objective arena, the sphere of one's general personal influence. At this point in our analysis, the self as a vibrating power emerges. As the all vibrates the universal ether into action, revealed in heat, electricity, magnetism, matter, so the human self vibrates the ether within the body and around the person and out into the objective arena. A certain region within the objective arena and centering in the deepest unconscious self field is distinctively individualized, given a character peculiar to each person, so that such portion of the objective arena may well be called the personal atmosphere. The personal atmosphere extends beyond, yet also pervades the body, but is not altogether coextensive with the entire objective arena. The personal atmosphere, then, is a certain surrounding region of the universal ether which your personal activities, conscious and unconscious, maintain in a state of continuous and more or less unified activity. Let us now examine the considerations which lead to the above conclusion. These considerations may be enumerated as Section 3, Third Study, Certain Basic Facts. 13. In our present existence, matter is the usual organ of mind, but means of communication between minds are of two orders, the material and the spiritual. Here, observe. Number 14. First basic fact. Ordinary communications between human minds obtained by means of the senses through material media. The author holds that material force is the active nature manifestation of the all-self. The infinite all-mind is eternally creative in the organization of spiritual force into material or other existences. One of the Upanishads of India says, "There is one ruler, the soul within all things, who makes the one form manifold." The ancient Hindu literature also incessantly declares, In the beginning, there was that only which is, one only, without a second. The Klamaths, says Max Muller, one of the Red Indian tribes, believe in a supreme God whom they call the Most Ancient One, our Old Father, or the Old One on High. He is believed to have created the world that is, to have made plants, animals, and men. But when asked how the Old Father created the world, the Klamath philosopher replied, by thinking and willing. And this is from a book titled Psychological Religion, page 383. We may then say that matter manifests through spirit. Spirit manifests, communicates in part through matter. Ultimate matter, matter in its finest form, a complex of electricity or a vast combination of the ether or an exhibit of etheric activities, may, at present in our history, serve as the partial medium of communication between the all-mind or all-self and the human mind or self. The all-self or infinite reveals in part through organized matter as seen, for example, in nature. But the infinite must also be held to reveal to the human by direct spiritual mental impact upon consciousness in the region of the deeper human self. The human reveals to the human by vibrations in matter which induce the sensations of hearing, smell, taste, touch, and sight. Second basic fact, matter exists so far as phenomena indicate in the following forms aside from those of ordinary observation. 15. 1. Stardust. There is nothing around which the dust of time, said Professor Alexander Mitchell, does not gather. It accumulates among the shelters of mountain cliffs, it falls upon ivy-mantled towers and ruined walls, and creates a rooting place for many a hardy herb and nidus for countless living germs. It clogs the water passages from our roofs and fills our cisterns with soils yielded by the atmosphere. It gathers about deserted structures. It buries the foundations of columns and temples. Whence the dust which has buried walls and towers and cities? Much of the soil which gathers upon roofs and in the crevices of old walls has been lifted by the winds from bare field and dusty streets. Even the snowy summits of the Alps become stained by terrestrial particles borne by upward currents into the mountain air. And yet I will venture the opinion that some dust comes to the earth daily which had never belonged to the earth before. Out from the depths of space, beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, from a granary of material germs which stock the empire of the sky, comes a perpetual but invisible rain of material atoms, like the evening dew emerging from the transparency of space into a state of growing visibility. Similarly, as to cryonite, cold dust, the name given by Nordenskjöld to a gray powder noticed by him in various places in Greenland on the surface of the inland ice at a great distance from earth or rock, and which he considered to be of cosmic origin. 16. 2. Coloring matter of the sky. The blue of the heavens is owing to the diffusion throughout the atmosphere of fine particles of matter. Thus, Professor Tyndall has said, everybody knows that as the sky bends towards the horizon, the purer blue is impaired. This diminution is a natural consequence of the predominance of coarser particles in the lower regions of the atmosphere. Were the particles which produce the pure celestial vault all swept away, we should, unless helped by what has been called cosmic dust, look into the blackness of celestial space. And were the whole atmosphere abolished along with its suspended matter, we should have the blackness spangled with steady stars. For the twinkling of the stars is caused by our atmosphere. 17. 3. Emanations. The theory of emanations as furnishing explanation of light, heat, etc. is not now received. Nevertheless, bodies seem constantly to be giving off fine particles of their substance. Sir David Brewster said, "All bodies throw off emanations in greater or less size and with greater or less velocities. These particles even enter more or less into the pores of solid and fluid bodies, sometimes resting upon their surface and sometimes permeating them altogether. Certain phenomena seem to indicate either ray movements in the ether in which bodies are immersed, as a sponge may be immersed in water, or moving particles of actual matter. If on a cold polished metal," said Professor John William Draper, "as a new razor, any object such as a wafer be laid and the metal be then breathed upon, and when the moisture has had time to disappear, the wafer be thrown off, though now the most critical inspection of the polished surface can discover no trace of any form. If we breathe once more upon it, a spectral image of the wafer comes plainly into view, and this may be done again and again. Nay, more, if the polished metal be carefully put aside where nothing can deteriorate its surface, and be so kept for many months, on breathing again upon the shadowy form appears." This could be found in the book titled Conflict Between Religion and Science, page 133. These facts were discovered by Professor Draper and M. Moser at about the same time. Professor William Denton quoted the above with slightly changing wording from Mr. G. H. Lewis, and then went on to say, as from that writer, "If a sheet of paper on which a key has been laid be exposed for some minutes to the sunshine, and then instantaneously viewed in the dark, the key being removed, a fading spectre of the key will be visible. Let this paper be put aside for many months, where nothing can disturb it, and then, in darkness, be laid upon a plate of hot metal. The spectre of the key will appear." And this could be found in the book titled The Soul of Things. In the case of bodies more highly phosphorescent than paper, the specters of many different objects which may have been laid on in succession will, on warming, emerge in their proper order. The explanation given of these phenomena is the action of exceedingly minute particles of matter upon the surfaces referred to. 18. The mystery of radioactivity also introduces us to hitherto unheard of divisions of the material substances. The older teachings of science held that matter consists of combinations of molecules, the latter being in turn complex aggregations of atoms. An atom was defined as the smallest divisible particle of matter, that is, a particle which cannot be further reduced, either mechanically or chemically. It is now known that the atom is itself an assemblage of inconceivably minute particles called corpuscles. Common objects for the microscope are blood corpuscles. Corpuscles here are not to be confused with the corpuscles of the atom, and milk globules. The thickness of the former, or the diameter of the latter, is such that 10,000 could be arranged side by side within the length of an inch. The fifth part of the 10,000th of an inch covers a very small space indeed in the field of a microscope, and a sphere whose diameter was equal to the fifth part of the thickness of a blood corpuscle might be taken as an approximation to the smallest object of which a microscope can give us anything like clear vision. A molecule has 5,000 times as small a diameter as such a sphere, and 125,000 million molecules would be required to fill it. The very heaviest molecule has less than 5,000 times the weight of the lightest, and if size is proportionate to weight, their diameter will be 16 times that of the smaller ones. But even they will show a diameter more than 300 times, and a surface nearly 100,000 times as small as the minimum visible. Such, then, are the individual particles out of which every mass in the world, and so far as we can judge, every mass in all other astronomical bodies is made up. From the book titled Radium Explained. And all molecules are in a state of incessant activity, are constantly moving in one way or another. The movement may be of elastic change of shape, as with a rubber ball, of vibration, as in the ends of a tuning fork, of rotation like that of a top, or when there is a large free space, of translation from place to place, as with a bullet. Or two or more of these kinds of movements may be combined. But what is certain is that all the molecules are constantly in movement, which we call for convenience vibration. The molecular vibrations are exceedingly energetic. Imagine a room to be pumped empty of air so that it contained nothing to resist the movement of flying missiles. Imagine a few thousand balls of such perfect elasticity as to have none of their energy lost in bouncing, to be set flying in all directions in such a room, so that they would go on forever bouncing against one another and against the walls of the room. They would represent, on an enormously magnified scale, the structure of a gas and the action of its molecules, which have had their vibrations in the liquid or solid state developed into long flights through space in the state of gas. When we speak, however, of long flights through space, it must be remembered that the expression is comparative, having reference to the extreme minuteness of the molecules and the spaces which separate them in liquids and solids. As a matter of fact, the average distances between two molecules, even when they're flying freely through space in a gas, is so small that if a cubic inch of air were magnified to the size of a cube of 16 miles each way, the molecules would even then be no more than 1/8 of an inch apart. And the number of collisions that each molecule has with others in 1 second is nearly 5,000 millions. But the molecules are composed of still finer particles, the atoms, which are also in a state of incessant activity, moving within the molecule in complex ways and with inconceivable rapidity. They are so small that each molecular system may be comparable to a stellar system. 19. Now, matter is everywhere disintegrating, going to pieces, and since this is true of the atoms, no less than of the molecules, they are thus seen to be other systems of smaller size than anything the human mind can conceive. That the atom disintegrates is observable in experiments made with radium, together with uranium, thorium, polonium, and actinium, forms of matter whose activity is scientifically marvelous. In all these substances, the atoms are found to be constantly going to pieces. Radium, for example, gives off without any apparent diminution of itself what are called alpha rays, which are made by the emanation of rather large particles. Beta rays, which are caused by the emanation of smaller particles, gamma rays, which are etheric vibrations, and other emanation particles distinguished from the rays, acting somewhat like a gas. In consequence of discoveries made with these forms of matter and other experimentation, it is now held that atoms consist of aggregations of enormously attenuated particles which are called corpuscles. These are so small that the smallest and lightest atom we know, that of hydrogen, contains from 800 to 1,000 of these corpuscles. Radium, however, is a heavy substance, one of the heaviest known, and its atom contains about 200,000 corpuscles. The corpuscles, however, are much smaller than is indicated by saying that their size is 200,000 part of that of an atom, for they do not nearly fill the space occupied by the atom. They fill as little of the atom space and are as far apart from one another as would be the case with the same number of the smallest grains of dust floating in hollow sphere of a gigantic football. The corpuscles are also in a state of incessant activity, and while their movements are not certainly known, it is thought that they are arranged in something like concentric rings within the atom. If the atom of radium contains 200,000 corpuscles, all moving, there must occur collisions, and some of the corpuscles, under certain conditions, will finally be jostled out of the system. This would be a case of disintegration. Radium gives off rays and emanation because its atoms go to pieces. 20. Finally, radioactivity is now believed to be almost universally present in all material substances. The truth probably is that just as radium is an extreme case among the radioactive substances, disintegrating more rapidly than thorium, uranium, polonium, or actinium, so these altogether are merely an extreme case of ordinary matter. There is good reason to think that every element, or almost every element, has a few of the atoms constantly disintegrating. But as the process is much slower than in the case of radium, it escaped notice till the most refined methods of observation were brought to bear. All the elements in the universe, it appears, are undergoing slow destruction. We cannot point to the hardest or most solid and say, here is a substance whose particles suffer no loss by degradation. Such disintegration of matter, such continuous process of emanation, may explain the fact that a grain of musk retains its scent-giving powers for many years without apparent loss of substance, or the scent of animals, which is often so remarkable and may also account for personal aversions and antipathies, the sense organs being affected by the assault of particles or corpuscles of matter flying incessantly through air and other objects. 21. 4. The ether. It is by some suggested that the corpuscles are composed of granules of the ether. Thus the granules make up the corpuscles, and latter constitute the atoms which combine to form the molecules, which in turn are aggregated into visible matter. Matter is ether. Others hold that the corpuscle is a mode of motion of the ether within itself, which mode of motion is electric. That is to say, matter is electricity and nothing but electricity. The corpuscles are by these scientists, therefore, called electrons. They conceive of an atom as an aggregation of negative corpuscles arranged in a certain number in a certain way and surrounded by a sphere of positive electricity, which balances the negative electricity by the corpuscles within it. And that you can find in the book titled The New Knowledge. Negative electricity represents motion of the corpuscle. What positive electricity is, we do not know, unless it be a state of the ether. Now, electricity is a mode of motion of the ether within itself. Matter is ether. 22. Of the exact nature of this substance we know nothing, just as we know nothing of the exact constitution of the self within the body. Certain established facts in science indicate its existence, however, and it is the only accepted explanation of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, and some of the activities of such elements as radium. The ether is defined as a medium of extreme tenuity and elasticity, supposed to be diffused throughout all space, as well as among the molecules and atoms of which material objects are composed, and to be the medium of the transmission of light and heat. It is declared that it can convey energy, the power to change the state of motion of a body, that it can present it at any moment, partly in form of kinetic, partly in that of potential energy, that is, therefore, capable of displacement and of tension, that it must have rigidity and elasticity, that its density is equal to that of our atmosphere at a height of about 210 miles, and that its rigidity is about 1/1000th of that of steel, that it is easily displaced by a moving mass, that it is not discontinuous or granular, and hence that as a whole it may be compared to an impalpable and all-pervading jelly through which light and heat waves are constantly throbbing, which is constantly being set in local strains and released from them, and being whirled in local vortices, thus producing the various phenomena of light, electricity, and magnetism, and through which the particles of ordinary matter move freely, encountering but little retardation, if any, for its elasticity, as it closes up behind each moving particle, is approximately perfect. And this you can see from the book titled Matter, Ether, and Motion, Dolbear. But what are we required to believe regarding this ether, which is conceived to fill all space and interpenetrate all material bodies occupying the interstices among atoms? The hypothesis is of a perfect, incompressible, frictionless fluid, which, to meet all the conditions of the problem, must be supposed to possess the most strangely contradictory properties. This fluid, Professor Jevons observes, might be regarded as an infinitely solid adamant. Sir John Herschel calculates the amount of force exerted at any point in space in the propulsion of waves of light and finds it to be more than 1 trillion times the elastic force of ordinary air at the Earth's surface, so that on this supposition, the pressure of ether upon 1 square inch of surface must be about 17 trillion pounds. Notwithstanding this, we are to believe that the resistance offered to the motions of the planets and other heavenly bodies is inappreciable. Professor Jevons adds, all our ordinary notions must be laid aside in contemplating such an hypothesis, yet it is no more than the observed phenomena of light and heat force us to accept. And this could be an extraction from the book titled Cosmos, the Soul and God by Arnold, page 76 and 77. The ether, we now see, is very unlike ordinary matter as known to us. It may be regarded in some respects as a liquid. In others, it manifests as the properties of a solid. It is both hard as adamant and at the same time perfectly elastic. It is sensitive to every slightest impulse, and a disturbance anywhere causes a tremor felt on the surface of countless worlds. Why do we accept the existence of this mode of material existence, the characteristics of which are so contradictory to those of ordinary matter as our experience reveals them to us? Because the undulatory theory of light and heat compels us to admit the existence of such a substance. Certainly, the discovery of the ether has enlarged our experience and demands a new definition of matter. The ether is a kind of matter and not something other than matter. As well might we say that a quantity of gas is not matter because its properties are not identical with those of a solid body. The supposition that the ether may be something entirely essentially different from matter is contradicted by all the terms that are used in describing it. The ether, then, may be regarded as the primitive state of matter. Again, you can refer to the book The Cosmos, the Soul, and God by Arnold. 23. If now matter is a complex of ether in motion, or if ether is attenuated matter, and if matter is electricity, or, since that is disputed, a form of motion of the ether within itself, and if energy is power to change the state of motion of a body, the only reality left is energy. A single further conclusion remains, to wit, that energy is will. What will is? The thing in itself. We do not know, except this one thing. It is an agent, a something capable of causing reaction in other existences than itself, and of reacting to the influence of such other existences. We have thus reduced the universe to 3 terms: matter, ether, energy, and we ought now to consider whether the triune conception may not be capable of a deeper synthesis. We have all, I imagine, a deep-seated conviction of the essential oneness of the universe. And to justify it, we must assume either that these three things are, after all, but forms or phases of an underlying and unknowable reality, or that, separate and distinct as they appear, they are themselves one, in some mysterious way altogether beyond the power of human reason to grasp. And again, you can refer to the book titled The New Knowledge, page 7. 24. 5. Spirit matter. This combination of word is a contradiction. It is employed merely to suggest a finer phase of matter than even the ether itself. That complexity which we have already been compelled to attribute to matter involves, of course, the possibility of still further complexity. There may be phases of matter as much more tenuous than ether as that is more tenuous than oxygen or carbon. Let the reader here observe. From a physiological standpoint, the condition of the persistence of memory and self-consciousness must be found in the continuous record of all our states of consciousness, which is made by the molecular changes going in the brain. The idea seems to be that the molecular and etheric structure of the brain may not present a medium sufficiently fine for the purposes indicated, and thus that a still finer phase of matter exists in the brain than atoms or ether. Though it is impossible to say what these changes are, no physiologists doubt that some cerebral changes correlated with every state of consciousness, and that thus the minute structure of the brain at any moment is a record of all previous experiences in life. And you can refer to the book titled Christian Faith in an Age of Science by Rice. But if the brain is immersed in the ether or in some finer state of matter, it is impossible to suppose activities in that medium sufficient to ensure a permanent record without also concluding that the medium itself would be set into motion of some kind. This points to communications between minds caused by vibrations or other motions taking place in the medium between brains. 25. Spirit matter may be tentatively held, then, as such an exceedingly attenuated state of ordinary matter. Certain accredited phenomena recorded by sane people are in evidence and yield further suggestions for the present study. Thus, a Dr. Clark of Boston related of the death of a patient. The patient, dropping her head upon her pillow as unexpectedly as she had looked up, her spirit departed. The conviction forced upon my mind that something departed from her body as that instant of time, rupturing the bonds of flesh, was stronger than language can express. Oliver Wendell Holmes says, Dr. Clark mentioned a circumstance to me not alluded to in the essay. At the very instant of dissolution, it seemed to him that there arose something, an undefined yet perfectly apprehended something, to which he could give no name, but which was like a departing presence. I should have listened to the story less respectfully, but for the fact that I had heard the same experience almost in the exact words from the lips of one whose evidence is to be relied upon. With the last breath of the patient she was watching, she had the consciousness that something arose, as if the spirit had made itself cognizable at the moment of quitting its mortal tenement. 26. Thus the human body exists in and consists of matter, which is composed of molecules, which are composed of atoms, which consist of still finer particles called corpuscles, which may be made up of yet more attenuated granules of the ether, or may be phases of negative electricity surrounded by positive, and are thus modes of motion of the ether or the finer material within itself. But in all its forms, matter certainly exists in a state of enormous molecular, atomic, and corpuscular activity. Everywhere there is inconceivable, invisible movement. Man's body, then, is the theater of a vast complex of such activities, and it exists in the midst of an untellable storm of vibrations, waves, undulations, vortices, and flying particles which are so minute that oftentimes they can only be described in the hieroglyphics of mathematics. 27. Third basic fact. The human brain seems to be essentially a battery. Professor William Draper has said, "I find that the cerebrum is absolutely analogous in construction to any other nervous arc. It is composed of centripetal and centrifugal figures, having also registering ganglia. If in other nervous arcs the structure is merely automatic, can display no phenomena of itself, but requires the influence of an external agent. The optical apparatus inert, save under the influence of light. The auditory, save under the impression of sound. The cerebrum, being precisely analogous in its elementary structure, presupposes the existence of some agent to act through it." Professor Bain wrote, "The structure of the nervous system and the experiments made upon the nerves and nerve centers establish beyond doubt certain peculiarities as belonging to the force that is exercised by the brain. This force is of a current nature. That is to say, a power generated at one part of the structure is conveyed along an intervening substance and discharged at some other part. The different forms of electricity and magnetism have made us familiar with this kind of action." So, Dr. M.P. Hatfield has said, "The arrangement of the nerve envelopes is so like that of the best constructed electrical cables that we cannot help thinking that both were constructed to conduct something very much alike." I know there are those who stoutly maintain that nerve force is not electricity, and it is not, in the sense that an electrical battery is the same thing as a live man. But nevertheless, nerve force is closely allied to that wonderful thing that for the want of some better and clearer understanding we agree to call electricity. Certain it is that the animal system generates electricity or some kindred force, however small the quantity. Aldini's experiments with frogs' legs proved the existence of animal electricity. Matteucci demonstrated that currents of electricity are always circulating in the frames of all animals. Dr. Prevost of Geneva succeeded in magnetizing delicate soft iron needles by placing them near the nerves and perpendicular to the direction which he supposed the electric current took. The magnetizing took place at the moment when, on irritating the spinal marrow, a muscular contraction was effected in the animal. In producing the effects, muscular action and chemical change are present. All states of body and mind involve constant molecular and chemical change. The suggestion arises that the brain, with its millions of cells and its inconceivable changes in substance, may be regarded as a transmitting and receiving battery. 28. The brain being a kind of battery, and the nerves conductors of released stored energy to different parts of the body by a kind of action similar to the actions of electricity and magnetism, it is suggested that, either by means of the ether or of some still finer form of matter, discharges of brain energy may be conducted beyond the limits of the body. If the nerve tracks correspond to wires, this refined medium may correspond to the ether field supposed to be employed in wireless telegraphy. As electrical movements are conducted without wires or other visible media, so may brain discharges be conveyed beyond the mechanism of the battery without the intervention of nerves, except as they may constitute a part of the battery. Generally speaking, such discharges would originate in two ways: by direct mental action or by mental or physical states, perhaps by a combination. Telepathy and hypnotism illustrate these suggestions. 29. Fourth basic fact. The brain battery manifests first in ordinary conscious mental action, secondly, in the action of the subconscious mind. Both the conscious and the subconscious minds are capable of originating vibratory movements in the ether medium. Professor James declares for the existence of two different strata of consciousness, ignorant of each other in the same person. He also says, the evidence for telepathy, weak and strong, taken just as it comes, forms a faggot and not a chain. No one item cites the content of another item as part of its own proof, but taken together, the items have a certain general consistency. There is a method in their madness, so to speak, so each of them adds presumptive value to the lot, and cumulatively, as no candid mind can fail to see, they subtract presumptive force from the orthodox belief that there can be nothing in any one intellect that has not come in through the orthodox experience of sense. For me, the orthodox belief has not merely had its presumption weakened, but the truth itself of the belief is decisively overthrown. 4. 30. Fourth study. Explanations. The above considerations suggest the following. 1. The theory of spiritualism. 2. Mental energy conveyed by means of an invisible material medium, impressing not only minds, but inanimate objects as well, as suggested above. 3. Direct contact of man's spiritual self by some mysterious astral extension or projection of itself with other selves or with inanimate objects. 4. The existence of an universal, immaterial, spiritual medium in which all persons and things are immersed, and by means of which the communications and impressions are conveyed. All the phenomena attending the supposed return of spirits can be accounted for, in the author's opinion, by the second explanation. This does not disprove spiritualism, it simply makes the demonstration of the latter impossible to science, however true it may nevertheless be. Extension of the self and direct contact of finite minds can never be scientifically verified by facts sufficiently connected or accumulated to form a basis for inevitable opinion, because all the facts can be referred to the second explanation. Sir Isaac Newton said, "It is inconceivable that inanimate brute matter should, without the mediation of something else which is not material, operate upon and affect other matter without mutual contact, as it must do if gravitation, in the sense of Epicurus, be essential and inherent in it. That gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, so that one body may act upon another through a vacuum without the mediation of anything else, by and through which their action and force may be conveyed from one to another, is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has, in philosophical matters, a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into." And Douglas Stewart, commenting upon these words, remarked, "The same train of thinking which had led these philosophers to suppose that external objects are perceived by means of species proceeding from this object to the mind, or by means of some impression made on the mind by the brain, has suggested to a late writer a very different theory, that the mind, when it perceives an external object, quits the body and is present to the object of perception. The mind is not where the body is when it perceives what is distant from the body, either in time or place, because nothing can act but when and where it is. Now the mind acts when it perceives, The mind, therefore, of every animal who has memory or imagination acts and by consequence exists when and where the body is not. For it perceives objects distant from the body both in time and place. That is, quits the body and comes in contact with the object perceived. The existence of an universal spiritual medium is a possibility too remote, in view of the equally possible and more easily handled second theory, to require discussion. It would only demand attention after disproof of the latter. And it is immaterial, so far as methods and results of the manifestation of mind power are concerned, whether the second or the fourth theory be adopted. The thought of science rejects the extension theory. 31. It remains then to affirm that the conveyance of these extraordinary communications and impressions have no explanation, or that they all may be referred to the second statement of theory, always accepting the action upon the finite mind of the infinite, who in the nature of the case does not necessarily require an intervening medium. The author holds that the theory of an universal material medium, at least in our present existence, is reasonable and accords with the facts brought to light by psychic investigation. In Mental Suggestion, Professor J. Okerowitz indicates some detailed consideration. Every living being is a dynamic focus. A dynamic focus tends ever to propagate the motion that is proper to it. Propagated motion becomes transformed according to the medium it traverses. Motion tends always to propagate itself. Therefore, when we see work of any kind, mechanical, electrical, nervic, or psychic, disappear without visible effect, then of two things one either, a transmission or a transformation. Where does the first end and where does the second begin? In an identical medium, there is only transmission. In a different medium, there is transformation. You send an electrical current through a thick wire. You have the current, but you do not perceive any other force. But cut that thick wire and connect the ends by means of a fine wire. The fine wire will grow hot. There will be a transformation of a part of the current into heat. Take a pretty strong current and interpose a wire still more resistance, or a very thin carbon rod. The carbon will emit light. A part of the current then is transformed into heat and light. This light acts in every direction around about, first visibly as light, then invisibly as heat and as electric current. Hold a magnet near it. If the magnet is weak and movable in the form of a magnetic needle, the beam of light will cause it to deviate. If it is strong and immovable, it will in turn cause the beam of light to deviate. And all this from a distance, without contact, without special conductors. A process that is at once chemical, physical, and psychical goes on in a brain. A complex action of this kind is propagated through the gray matter, as waves are propagated in water. Regarded on its physiological side, an idea is only a vibration that is propagated, yet which does not pass out of the medium in which it can exist as such. It is propagated as far as other like vibrations allow. It is propagated more widely if it assumes the character which subjectively we'll call emotive, but it cannot go beyond without being transformed. Nevertheless, like force in general, it cannot remain in isolation. It escapes in disguise. Thought stays at home as the chemical action of a battery remains in the battery. It is represented abroad by its dynamic correlate, called in the case of the battery a current, and in the case of the brain, I know not what, but whatever its name may be, it is the dynamic correlate of thought. I have chosen to use the term dynamic correlate. There is something more than that. The universe is neither void nor dead. A force that is transmitted meets other forces, and if it is transformed only little by little, it usually limits itself to modifying another force at its own cost, though without suffering perceptibly thereby. This is the case particularly with forces that are persistent, concentrated, well seconded by their medium. It is the case with the physiological equilibrium, nervic force, psychic force, ideas, emotions, tendencies. These modify environing forces without themselves disappearing. They are but imperceptibly transformed. And if the next man is of a nature exceptionally well adapted to them, they gain in inductive action. 5. Fifth study, the present theory. 32. Here then is a possible explanation of communications and influences conveyed from mind to mind without the intervention of the common visible means of the physical senses as ordinarily understood. The conclusion will be the same on the supposition of a special refinement of sense perception beyond that recognized in the textbooks, so that such impressions are still conveyed to their appropriate nerves, the latter being, however, capable of receiving inconceivably minute vibrations of the surrounding medium. Whether the communications are concerned with the brain center only or with the entire nervous system would seem to be an indifferent question. 33. And if brain energy can thus pass the limits of the body, and if the medium of such action is an ether-like existence in which all things are immersed, may we not have here an explanation of the popular believed influence of things? In A Mortal Antipathy, Oliver Wendell Holmes makes Dr. Butts say, "The circumstances connected with the very common antipathy to cats were a remarkable in many points of view as similar circumstances in the case of Maurice Kirkwood. The subjects of that antipathy could not tell what it was which disturbed their nervous system. All they knew was that a sense of uneasiness, restlessness, oppression came over them in the presence of one of these animals. It may be through some emanation. It may be through the medium of some electrical disturbance. What if the nerve thrills passing through the whole system of the animal propagate themselves to a certain distance without any more regard to intervening solids than is shown by magnetism?" Dr. Holmes gives in Over the Teacups an interesting account of a breakfast conversation with the members of his own household concerning a case of trial by battle, and of his finding immediately in the morning mail a letter from an English friend referring to the specific trial, that of Abraham Thornton, which had been under discussion, and to nothing else. Then number 7 remarks, "The impulse which led you to tell that story passed directly from the letter, which came charged from the cells of the cerebral battery of your correspondent." What? You cannot conceive of a charge of cerebricity fastening itself on a letter sheet and clinging to it for weeks, while it was shuffling about in mailbags, rolling over the ocean, and shaken up in railroad cars? And yet the odor of a grain of musk will hang around a note or address for a lifetime. Do you not remember what Professor Silliman says in that pleasant journal of his about the little ebony cabinet which Mary, Queen of Scots, brought with her from France? In these illustrations there is at least a suggestive value. Dr. Holmes remarked elsewhere, "We know that every human being, as well as every other living organism, carries its own distinguishing atmosphere. If a man's friend does not know it, his dog does, and can track him anywhere by it. This personal peculiarity varies with the age and conditions of the individual. It may be agreeable or otherwise a source of attraction or repulsion, but its influence is not less real, though far less obvious and dominant than in the lower animals. The immediate vicinity of the individual or thing, then, existing in various states and conditions, may be called the psychic or the personal atmosphere." 34. Let it be noted, however, that the theory of the following pages is not scientifically demonstrated as such. It is set forth and analyzed as a basis for practical suggestions that will surely prove useful in contact with other people. It involves many elements of truth, and the author accepts it until a better one is offered. The fact that it is not new in its basic idea, thought communicated through ether vibrations, but is rather common in current literature, may lend weight to its analysis as given in these pages. The ether is accepted by science as a reality and as a medium for light, heat, electricity, magnetism, etc. The nervous system is certainly comparable to an electric battery with connecting wires. Communications of thought and feeling without the mediation of sense perception, as commonly understood, is now established. Inanimate objects exert, now and then, strange influences. People certainly carry with them a personal atmosphere. The representation of the condition of these facts by a psychic field compared to the magnetic or electric field becomes, therefore, if not plausible, at least convenient. As such a field exists surrounding the sun, so may a field be assumed as surrounding each human individual. We have already strong grounds for believing that we live in a medium which conveys to and fro movements to us from the sun, and that these movements are electromagnetic, and that all the transformation of light and heat, and indeed the phenomena of life, are due to the electrical energy which comes to us across the vacuum which exists between us and the sun. A vacuum which is pervaded by the ether, which is a fit medium for the transmission of the electromagnetic waves. By means, then, of a similar theory applied to mind and brain and body, we may find reasonable explanation of many otherwise insoluble mysteries in our life, and, which is of more importance, deduce certain suggestions for the practical regulation of life in the greatest individual interest. The analysis to follow stands for facts of common experience, and the rules that come after call for a rational and beneficial exercise of the great soul power here entreated, the practical will. By means of the theory, the facts and various practical suggestions may now be readily indicated. We have reached the end of the 5th study. There is much more to come. Hope you can join me at the next video, where the author is going to dive deeper into the next few studies, where he's going to offer practical guide to help raise the personal atmosphere and vibration through different practices. And he's going to discuss energy and how energy leaves impressions on both the animate and inanimate, and also the influence of the laws and operations of psychic vibrations. Before you head out, please do like, share, and subscribe.